Thank you, everyone, for showing up. We got a bunch of you here in the webinar today. We're going to cover a couple things. The whole kind of theme today is being, how do we take these calls that we're doing into our prospects, and how do we take some of the coldness out of those calls? How do we warm them up a little bit, get people a little bit more receptive to talking to us? I got two guests I want to introduce y'all to real quick. We got Nick Cegelski. We've done a couple webinars together, Nick. Actually, I think a couple on our side, a couple on your side. Nick is the founder and co-host of one of the top sales podcasts, one of my favorite sales podcasts out there, 30 Minutes to President's Club, with his partner in crime, Armand. And I would say you're most known, Nick, for just straight up, no bullshit sales advice. So
what I try to do. I mean, I think one of the most frustrating things is when somebody says, "Oh yeah, just make your cold calls warm." It's like,
yeah.
Well, how do I do that? What we're just talking about?
Yeah, let's talk about how, dude. So Nick, good to have you. Nathan Steele, we've done one of these webinars together. Nathan heads up customer success at Aller, and you got like over a decade in the game, dude. Started at Salesforce. One of your best months there, I was reading on your LinkedIn, was 210% of quota. Mm-hmm. So Nathan was crushing quotas over there, and he's going to bring a really interesting perspective today on the customer success side, how he's used Aller, how their customers use Aller, all of that kind of good stuff. So Nathan, it's good to have you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
Okay. So one of the big things that we're going to be talking about is sales triggers. So I got a poll for the audience. And one other thing too, if you got questions, we definitely want to answer them. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen here in Zoom. If something comes up related to the topics today, throw it into the Q&A and we'll help you answer it. So I got two quick questions for you in the poll. Do you currently leverage sales triggers in your outreach? Let us know that first question. So do you take news insights, triggers, whatever it might be, and do you leverage them when you're making cold calls, sending emails? And then let me know, what's your process for finding those sales triggers? So is it manually through Google, like a lot of us, Google Alerts maybe, LinkedIn? Do you use a tool? And while that's going on, Nick, I'll throw this question your way first. Let's talk about cold calling, just sort of the state of cold calling. I know you and I tend to talk about this topic a lot when we create content together, but obviously cold calling is not dead. But what is kind of the state of cold calling? Is it still an effective medium? And what is maybe the difference between the types of calls that we make in B2B versus the people that sit in call centers? Nothing against them. That's where I came from, and sell car warranties and that sort of stuff. Let's start with that.
Short answer, no, it's not dead. Longer answer is, what doesn't necessarily work is just ripping through a list. And I think people hear, okay, you got to do your research, you got to do your planning. I have found that cold calling is less effective when it is a single channel approach. If the only thing I'm doing is cold calling and I'm not doing other things. The way that I think about prospecting from a B2B perspective is you probably want to be contacting people on different channels, right? Phone, email, LinkedIn, maybe even direct mail, gifting, etc. But the phone, when used properly, is the best way to direct attention to all of those other channels. So oftentimes what won't work is if I'm just making a bunch of cold calls and hoping that my 25 dials are going to yield people calling me back and asking for meetings. What will work is using the phone to start conversations and direct people's attention to, I'm sending you an email with a really specific ask. That's my take on things.
Yeah. Nathan, what about you?
I'll second that. Yeah, I think that's perfect. I mean, back in the day for me, which is sad to say because I'm not that old, when I worked at Salesforce, we would make, upwards of 200 calls a day. I mean, those SDRs are just hounding the phones constantly. And the thing that really helped me, just like Nick said, was I would use the phone to direct their attention to where I wanted them to look. Because 9 times out of 10, I'm getting a voicemail, unfortunately. And so I'd utilize that voicemail opportunity, not to pitch my product, but to relate, like, hey, I just sent you this crazy article about something you guys have done. I'm not sure if you had a chance to check it out. Let me know when you do. And just leave it at that. And it was always my goal to point them towards some kind of information nugget that I could provide, or some way to relate them to where I could actually engage with them. Better yet, they called me back, but that was pretty rare. So it's always, how else can I expand my outreach rather than just cold calling. But I do think hands down, cold calling is still a wonderful way to prospect. And if you're not doing it, you're absolutely missing out.
Yeah, I think there's just a theme from what both of you have shared just now. And that's one, the phone is one of several channels that you can use, and your contact rate will literally 3 to 4x if you incorporate email and social on top of the phone. The other thing I picked up too, Nick, that I don't want to gloss over from you, I'm a huge advocate for this as well, is use the phone and the message that you leave to point someone to another channel.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, what I heard from you, I think that's super important there too, is that the message that you leave is not I'm calling from so-and-so company and I'm calling to tell you more about our product. Like this relevant word, relevance is the word that is being thrown around a lot. And that's what we're going to focus a lot on the conversation today, is how to add that relevance. But I am curious, before we dig in the chat, let us know, do you check your voicemail if it's from an unknown number? So when I say check, will you either give it a play or read the transcription? Give me a yes or no in the chat. If you get a voicemail from an unknown number, what do you do with it?
I always do. I always look at mine, and 8 times out of 10, it's somebody calling me about refinancing my student loans. But I still look at the transcription because, I don't know, somebody called me. It got my attention.
Yeah.
It always gets my attention, even when it's a spam number. Even when it says scam likely and they leave a voicemail, I look at the voicemail. Maybe I'm sick in the head.
No, I think it's that seed of curiosity, right? And we all have that just like, ooh, who called me? Like we're always curious because nobody calls anymore. So it does actually really stand out when you get a phone call. You want to know who it was. You want to know what it was about. You might roll your eyes and delete it, but you're still going to go check that transcript or listen to it.
Yes.
Stephanie goes, unless it's Walgreens, yes, I know my RX. I get the same ones.
Rachel says, amen, Stephanie. So the reason I asked that is that the stat, I think there's a lot of mixed stats around this, but voicemails have like a 90% open rate, 90+%. All three of us here and most of us in the chat, it sounds like I have 100% open rate on the voicemails I receive. Mm-hmm. I'm going to play every single one of those at least long enough for the transcription to pop up and for me to decide what to do with it. So just because people aren't picking up the phone necessarily doesn't mean that the phone is not still an effective way to start a conversation with someone. So what I want to kind of segue into is this whole relevance piece of the equation. And I think there's a couple kind of things that stick out, but Chorus AI has some really interesting data on the average length of a cold call. I'm really curious, Nick, for you, and Nathan, for you, what do you think the average length of a cold call is, at least from Chorus's data?
Oh gosh, I would think less than 10 seconds, because I think most salespeople really struggle with their opening of the cold call and end up getting hung up on more often than not, which is why I think the most important, like if you're going to look at where you spend your time in improving your cold call skills, I think the opener is the most important part, because if you can't get past the opener, doesn't matter if you practiced on how to book the meeting, you can't get past that. So my guess is less than 10 seconds, maybe less than 8.
What do you think?
I was a little bit more positive. I was going to say probably around 30 seconds, because somebody's going to ask how your day going. So everybody opens up their cold call, right? We're like, hey, how's it going? Because they care so much. Yeah. So I'd say 30 seconds is probably the cutoff.
Oh, see, I think most are, they go, hey, Nathan, this is Nick with ABC. Did I catch you at a bad time? And your answer is yes. Click.
I've done that. I have done that.
Like the worst drags it all down. But let's hear Jason.
So it's actually around 80 seconds. But
dang.
That's the length of the recording. Right.
So that's the ringing.
That's going to include dial time as well.
Yeah.
So I think it'd be pretty safe for us to assume that it's probably less than 45 or 50 seconds, probably somewhere around that mark. It's enough to get an intro in, maybe an objection, a little bit of back and forth. And obviously that average is weighted because all the successful cold calls, they tend to be 4 to 6 plus minutes. Mm-hmm. So what we're going to focus on here, let's talk about how to add something relevant so we don't get shut down in that first little part. So Nathan, I'll kick this question your way. This is sort of what Aller and tools like it specialize in, but I
Yeah.
want to talk to you about like ways that we could warm up a conversation. And maybe let's even speak from the prospect's point of view. If I'm a prospect and I pick up the phone and it's an unknown number, what are some of the things that I could hear in that first 30 to 60 seconds that are like, okay, you got my attention?
Yeah, I think the things that stand out to me, and we hear this a lot from Aller's customers, is you got to be, let's say, well educated in their industry. So the first thing is knowing who they are and what they do is, I would say, the most valuable thing. Don't come in like I will say this as a cliche to the people on the call, as a typical SDR of just, my goal is to get you to hear about my product. That is the last thing that person picking up the phone wants to hear about, is your product. That's not why they picked up the phone. They probably think it's a business call. They think it's something to do with their customers or their products. So if you come in with the mindset of, hey, I'm here to learn about what you do, and I'm here to, maybe supply some information about the industry, about a really cool thing that's happening at your company. Maybe I read an article. Maybe it's something personalized around your, again, space, your job, your position. I know, hey, I just saw 13 other people in your space did this. Have you heard about what's going on in your space? It supplies a lot more authenticity to why you reached out, because I'm calling to learn rather than I'm calling to tell. I hope that kind of answers the question, but that's the majority of what Aller's customers are doing, is they're collecting information around industries and around roles and around spaces, and then utilizing a very specific event to go drive a conversation. So they know, hey, this company just won an award. I know the space really well. I'm going to call them and see what they're doing to be the best in their industry, and mention, I just read this article that you guys won this award. I'm not sure if you're aware. It was in Forbes. Congratulations. I'd love to know what you guys are doing. And it drives a significantly better conversation point. And I almost say they'll be taken aback, because you're not saying, hey, this is Nathan from Aller. Would you like to buy our product? Right? It's hey, I want to learn what you're doing. And they'll talk. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So getting them to talk, and it's this whole shift in approach of like, you first, me second, that I think permeates itself through the entire sales process. And it's, how can I start with something about you instead of starting with something about me? Mm-hmm. And that mindset shift, if you just take that and apply that intention into how you approach this call, the answers become pretty obvious. And again, for everyone, we're going to talk tactically what that might look and sound like. But Nathan mentioned the relevant pieces, the who they are and what they do. What are things that you would want to know about, not maybe the individual, but just about the people, the personas, and the companies you're reaching out? What are some of the kind of basic things that I would want to know about people like this prospect before I even pick up the phone?
So I'm going to answer that question. I'm also going to answer the question you asked about how we actually get their attention. Because if I want to get Jason's attention, I'm going to really simplify this. What I'm not going to do is say my name. I'm not going to say Nick. Jason doesn't look up when I say my own name. But if I say Jason, that got his attention. And so the way to get somebody's attention is something about them. Somebody's name is their attention. It is something about them. And so, like Nathan was saying, on the opener, on the pitch, I want to have it be as little as possible about me and as much as possible about them. And so even when I'm opening the call, the way that I get their attention, the way that I get them to say, okay, this person is different than most other salespeople, and this person has gotten my attention and is worth a conversation with, is if I can front load the conversation with things that I know about them. Now, most salespeople hear that and they sort of know that, right? I'm supposed to talk about them, lead with them, not myself. And they think that they have to do this deep dive investigation where they stalk Nathan's Instagram and find out that he ate at a nice steakhouse 6 months ago. And now they send him a long personalized email about Del Vecchio's steak. And he's like, that's kind of creepy. I went there with my wife for our anniversary. Like, that's weird. The triggers to think about are, all you have to do is work backwards. Why are you, the salesperson, calling that company? Think about stuff like, okay, the ICP. Are they a certain, think about your territory. What is actually in your territory? When I was calling law firms, it was because that they practiced a certain type of law. They were a certain size of law firm. I would look at triggers for stuff like, oh, they just opened a new office because the thing that I sold was relevant to that. They just put on a certain event. The thing that I sold was relevant to that. So the only thing you have to do as a salesperson is figure out what is making me call this company, and then weave that into the way that you open the call. And I can talk about how I do that later. I just rambled a lot at you all.
Yeah.
We got him. We got him once.
Yeah.
He froze for a second.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple really kind of big things there that I want to highlight, and let's get into tactically what this might sound like in the first 60 seconds. And then I want to reverse engineer and totally unpack because I think one of the questions is, what am I looking for and how much time should I spend looking for that thing? Before we get to that, let's give a really good example of what that might, sound like. I'll just give a kind of a customer example. I have a client that sells ed tech. So they're selling it to K through 12, school districts. So one of the things that they're looking for is like any kind of news that this school district is putting out about any student engagement type of initiatives, learning initiatives. Some of this stuff is very public in their annual reports and goals. And we're literally going to open up, hey, Nathan, it's Jason with so-and-so company, was calling about the XYZ 2023 initiative. Or, hey, here's the initiative. Was calling about that. By the way, it's Jason with XYZ company. Right? That's kind of like an example. But Nick, I want to kick this question your way. What's an example of what this might sound like in terms of what we would weave into that opener?
Yep.
Let's start with that first, and then we can kind of unpack it a little bit.
Yep. Okay. So you pick up the phone and you go, hello? What I say, what comes out of my mouth is, Jason, I'm calling because I just finished reading the article about your team's expansion into Europe. My name's Nick. I know I'm calling you totally out of the blue here. Do you mind if I take 1 minute? I'll tell you why I'm calling you specifically, and then you can tell me whether or not it makes sense for us to speak. You've often heard me, Jason, we've done a lot of these together, advocate for what's called a permission-based opener, right? Where I say my name, I say my company, I acknowledge this is a cold call, and then I ask for permission to proceed. And that will work. Just like a basic permission-based opener will work 8 out of 10 times. Problem is, the other person doesn't really have context for why I've called, and they might think that I'm, the Walgreens rep trying to upsell them on their RX or something, or really the student loan person. And so I want to differentiate right away. And so all I did was I took the trigger, I took the reason for why I called, and I put that right up front. Jason, literally, it comes out of my mouth. Jason, Jason, I'm calling because I just finished reading the article about your team's expansion into Europe. Jason, I'm calling because I just finished reading the job posting for the head of HR that you put online. Jason, I'm calling because it looks like you guys just opened a new office in Kentucky. Here's my name. I know I'm calling you out of the blue. Can I take 1 minute to tell you why I'm calling you specifically? And then you can tell me whether or not it makes sense for us to speak. That's how I weave that trigger right up front to get their attention.
Yeah. So I just dropped kind of a scripted version of that into the chat that you all can check out. Let us know in the chat. This will help us kind of customize this. What is a typical trigger for those of you guys that look for these triggers and have them? Drop into the chat. What's a typical trigger that you would find on your prospect when you're researching them? So think about, funding, Jesse says. Think about acquisitions. Think about hiring. Think about stuff you might find on this person's LinkedIn profile, new to the position, job changes. Let us know. Hit us in the chat. What are some of the stuff that you might find triggers wise? And we can kind of work with you guys to help kind of weave some of this in. So Nathan, what are your thoughts on that in terms of the approach? I know this is a big part of what you sort of started to unpack earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I know, this is my question. How do I know if something is going to be the right thing to talk about or not? And how do I decide what to look for so that I'm not that rep that spends hours looking for something to find the perfect thing? Like, what are some guidelines maybe that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously going to be personal to each company, right? And each person. The one thing I'll recommend, and this is one of the reasons I love being on these calls, go talk to CSMs, go talk to your customers, and go begin to understand what your customers are doing, right? Where your customers are successful, and you'll begin to find where these triggers and where these insights can align into how you can go sell more effectively and more efficiently. So if you have a lot of customers that are extremely successful with your products and they all happen to be opening new offices because your product aligns into that, you now know you can utilize a new office trigger as a great way to go spark a new conversation with a prospect. So I always think it's really helpful to understand your customer base and understand the value you're providing to your actual paying customers in order to prospect more effectively. And I know that's kind of a broad answer, but the reality is, right, understand where your value actually is being utilized by the customers and not just that really nice painting you can paint. Understand the true usage, the true value, and then link that to those relatable topics that can drive conversations to those value adds.
Yeah. So Nathan, if someone was an SDR, BDR, or an account executive, and they came to you, let's say they work at Owler, and they wanted to ask you some questions like this, what would be some good questions that would allow you to kind of help them in this way to provide some of these triggers and things to look for, just so that people watching have something that they could go and ask their CSM?
Yeah. I'll tell you right now, it'd be the best day of my life. I mean, salespeople very rarely reach their hand across the aisle and talk to CSM. So if you guys aren't doing that, the customer success teams are always open and eager to help learn as well as coach salespeople, because we do have a lot of insight into how the product's being used. And I think from the SDR space, the questions I would ask would be around how are the customers using our product, right? Because we sell it, right? We pitch it a specific way, but that isn't necessarily how people end up using it. And so that's the first question I would ask is, hey, do you mind sharing with me and telling me how our customers are using the product? Where are they getting the most value? Where are they extracting that value? How is the adoption, right? Are they using it all the time? Are they not using it very much? And where can I focus on really kind of lying the additional insight and value to these prospects based off what our customers are doing? So that's where I'd start, is just walk over and ask them, hey, how are our customers using this? And where are they getting the value out of the tool?
Yeah. And then one other, I'll drop this into the chat too. What problems?
Yeah, it's a big one.
Are they solving? Right. This will give you kind of some good things that you can backtrack into some triggers. And I want to share one thing real quick and kind of facilitate a conversation with you guys around this. Let me drop it into the chat. This LinkedIn post, it's a little older, but it's got some good stuff in it. Here, let me share my screen. So what you'll see in this, there's a little cheat sheet here on stuff to look for. And I want to give people a second to take a look at this. These are all of kind of like the menu list of options of things that you could look for. Nick, what kind of comes up for you if you're kind of sitting in the seat of a rep here and you're looking at a list like this and kind of thinking about how to kind of prioritize what to look for?
Okay, well, by virtue of having a list, that is really, really powerful, because what most reps do is when they look at their account list or their prospects that they need to do some research on that they're then going to go cold call, they don't have any guardrails. They just start searching the internet. And next thing you know, they're looking at like the customer's MySpace page from 12 years ago, but they haven't really found anything and 45 minutes have gone by. And so I think it's important to, prior to doing all of this research, take a look at a thing like this LinkedIn post here, which is awesome. You made a checklist and set some guardrails for yourself. Identify the top, okay, out of the 15 things on this list, what are the 5 to 7 that most frequently come up? What are the ones that I most frequently lean on? And pare the list down to only look for those. Because if you haven't found anything after like 5 to 7 searches, you're probably like, you need to think about the law of diminishing returns. You might find more if you keep looking and looking and looking. But at that point, if your sort of top 5 triggers, you've not found anything, my advice is to then revert to a more basic, maybe not trigger, but ICP reason for why you're calling. Okay, they're a law firm with less than 70 employees. I might just mention that when I make the cold call, right? Because even though to me it doesn't seem like, oh, that's super like relevant and like crispy and tight, to the customer, I'm standing out when I point out that specific thing that I know about their organization. Like for me, I'm just like, well, that's just their company information, that all my territories like that. But that is a specific piece of criteria about them. So set some guardrails. And if you can't find anything after like 5 to 7 of the top triggers, revert to something more basic.
Yeah. And there's kind of two schools of, not necessarily two schools of thoughts, maybe two methods that you can use to get that information. I think what's really important is knowing what you want to look for manually so that you could go try to find it, and then having something like an Aller that you can use that will notify you of stuff. LinkedIn Sales Nav's, kind of another good one, but being notified of stuff that you know to look for. So before we spend more time talking tactically about the cold call and warming it up, there's one other thing. What do you, and I'll kick this question your way first, Nick, in terms of prioritizing accounts and people to reach out to, how do you think about prioritizing this based off the information that is available to me versus just approaching a list from top to bottom, which I think is really easy to do. It's really easy to just be handed a big list of 100 accounts or 400 prospects and just work it from top to bottom. Yeah. How do you think about using stuff like this, insights and what's available to you, to kind of prioritize maybe who you reach out to?
Depends upon the intensity of the trigger. Typically, my recommendation when working in new territory would be think critically about, for most salespeople, if there aren't super relevant triggers on certain accounts, I probably do want to work from largest account to smallest account. At least that's how I did it. There was a world once where I sold a piece of software that was a potential replacement for a lot of law firms used a tool that was created by Thomson Reuters that was getting shut off. They were ending life of the tool. And so I knew if a customer used that piece of technology, it was a super easy. And I literally could call them and be like, I know this thing's going away. I've got a potential replacement, want to talk. And that would get me a meeting every single time. And so I think it depends on the intensity of the trigger. That's one where I've just prioritized all of those accounts. So I don't know if it's a great answer because it's more of it depends, but that's what I would say.
Yeah. I think the takeaway there that's just super important is, even if you're an enterprise or strat rep with 5 or 10 accounts, prioritizing the people and the companies that you put most of your time into based on the best information that's available.
Yes.
It's a really underrated thing. It just increases your odds of success.
I think there's a saying that I've really liked recently, which is any plan is better than no plan. And I think if you can take 42 seconds up front before starting to work your territory for the first time and just say, how am I going to go about this? You will save yourself so much hard work down the line. And so that's one recommendation that I had is take 15 minutes to critically think about what is the right approach here for me specifically, because that will save you a lot of wasted effort.
Yeah, no, I love it. Nathan, if we kind of switch gears here a little bit, and I want to kind of get back to focusing on the call itself. What have you found in terms of getting that conversation started? You were really big, and one thing I wrote notes, the who they are and what they do. How does that get incorporated into, that first 60, 90 seconds of the call? We have a trigger, that sort of stuff that we want to talk about. What other relevant pieces of information can we add to that phone call to signal that we're a peer?
Yeah, I think, one of the things that I'm hyper biased here because I've used Aller pretty much my entire career, and I just happened to land working here as well, is I utilize competitive relationships. And so I will dive in. And if I know that I'm calling, I'll use Uber as an example. I know for a fact they're competing with Lyft and Grab and Ula and Didi and all these other ride sharing companies. And it's really valuable to bring up the conversation of, hey, these are the other companies in your space. Perhaps we're already working with a couple of those, and this is the value we've supplied to them. But bringing in, again, just your knowledge of the space. It's not just, I just finished reading this article about the new leadership hire at your company. I saw X, Y, and Z also has done a similar thing, right? I'd love to learn more about what your business is doing to stay competitive or do something in that space. So just hyper focus on, I know your industry, I'm comfortable in your space, I'm well informed on what's going on, and I'm here to help. Again, that always be consulting methodology I saw there earlier. That's my mentality from a CS side, is I'm always just trying to help. And if you want to buy something, I'll get out of the way and let you do it. But I'm always just here to try to help and know that I'm informed on your space. I'm not just some sales guy that doesn't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. I think that industry piece is is interesting. I interviewed a guy, Moeed Amin, and he runs a consulting firm, and it's in the 400s of like documented customer interviews that he's done in the last decade. And when he's pulled people and asked them, the overwhelming majority of prospects talked about industry acumen being so much more important even than like how good the product is. It's like, what is this rep's understanding of our industry? And I think to your point, Nathan, one of the things that we tend to gloss over is we want to say our solution's industry agnostic. And anytime a rep or sales leader says that, I just kind of roll my eyes a little bit, because I'm like, your prospects don't look at the solution like that.
Yeah.
They don't think about it like that. They want something that feels specialized to them. So even though you provide the same solution to healthcare, let's say, and something completely different, I don't know, sports and entertainment industry, even though you're providing the same solution, healthcare feels like a very, very different industry from dealing with professional sports teams and entertainment, you know? So Nick, to get back to like kind of the call, just to kind of tag on what Nathan mentioned there. So I think the first principle that we talk about is front load that trigger. So make that the very first thing that comes out of your mouth. And if I heard you correctly, you don't even introduce yourself until after you do that. You don't say, hey, Nick, this is Jason with Outbound Squad. You say, hey, Nick, here's what I know about you, essentially. Oh, by the way, it's like an, oh, by the way, this is Jason with Outbound Squad. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? And then any other variations of introductions that you like to do? And then we'll kind of get to the next part of the call.
Yeah. So the reason that I'm putting my name and company second is it's less important than getting their attention, right? I want to lead with, I just finished checking out the job posting that you did about the HR coordinator role that you're hiring for. By the way, my name's Nick Cegelski, and I know I'm calling you out of the blue. Do you mind if I take 1 minute? I'll tell you why I called you specifically, and then you can tell me whether or not it's worth a chat. A couple things that I'm doing there. One, I'm leading with the trigger for why I called. Two, I'm saying my name. I'm actually not saying my company name there. And I want to be clear, all of this is coming out of my mouth before the other person speaks, right? That whole opener comes out of my mouth. I get through it before the other person speaks. Amanda says, do you ever get interrupted during that opener, during the first few lines? No. And the reason for it is I have this incredibly rehearsed. And so you can hear the way that I say it. Jason, they answer the phone and I go, Jason, I just finished reading the article about your hiring for a new head of HR. My name's Nick Cegelski, and I know I'm calling you out of the blue here. Do you mind if I take 1 minute? I'll tell you why I called you specifically, and then you can tell me whether or not it makes sense for us to speak. If they try to interject, this is the one time that I actually might not be crazy empathetic and customer-centric. I want to get through all of that statement because the ask is you're in control after this ask. But I want them to know I'm a professional. I'm calling you for a business reason. That's why I have the trigger up front. I'm also a professional. I've told you my name. I'm going to get into the name of my company. I'm going to get into the name of I'm going to get into why I think this is relevant, why I called, etc. But after you give me permission. But I need to get through that opening statement. Otherwise, you're going to get hit with questions you answer in that opening statement. Wait, who is this? Why are you calling? I'm going to get to that. Let me get through that opener. So I do that. Any variations on that you asked about, Jason? One would be if I really can't find any trigger whatsoever, I might just use a standard permission-based opener, which just sounds like you answer and I go, Nathan, this is Nick Cegelski with 30 Minutes to President's Club. I know I'm calling you totally out of the blue here. Do you mind if I take 1 minute? I will tell you why I called you specifically, and then you can tell me whether or not it makes sense for us to chat. And I use that word specifically because I want him to feel like this is a targeted cold call, which it is. I'm not just ripping through a big list. So key points here: lead with that trigger, acknowledge it is a cold call, defer to them. Hey, you can tell me whether or not it makes sense for us to speak, and use that word specifically, why I called you specifically. So those are some of the things that I'm doing in that upfront statement to immediately get them to sit up.
Yeah. And I dropped that into the chat again, just so you guys have a transcript of that. I think is that pretty close, Nick, to what you said?
I'm looking. Jason, I'm calling because I just finished reading about, it's not always an initiative. Because if it is an initiative, awesome, right? I want to tie it to that. Sometimes it just might be anything that prompted me to call them, because I spent most of my career selling to law firms, and most law firms didn't put out a lot of press releases or articles or news things. Like, I could barely find any information on the individual. And so sometimes it would literally be like, I just finished reading the mission statement on your website where you wrote about your core value of X. Do you mind if I take, like, I'm literally anything to be, oh, this person has done some semblance of research on me. And so, and so it wouldn't always, that trigger there, the mission statement wasn't always relevant to what I sold, but like I would find a way to sort of attach it later in the call, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, I love that. There's a question I want to get to here from Stephanie. She said, since a lot of us are dealing with multiple generations, I like that she said boomers in there. Boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. How, if at all, does that change your approach? I'll kick that question your way first, Nathan. If we're reaching out to different generations of folks, does that at all affect how we might approach using the phone to get in contact with them?
For me personally, no. I actually have clients of every age, of every culture, and in different countries. The thing that relates to me the best is we're all humans. And it's easy to just relate on that aspect of hey, I'm here and I'm interested in you. And for me, that's transcended age. Now, the way that you reach out in terms of the channel might change dramatically. I have much better luck through LinkedIn, through social media means with younger people than I do with boomers per se. But when it comes to a phone call, I know that the younger generations, 99.9% of the time, aren't going to pick up. It's going to go to voicemail. So I'm focused on voicemails, really good ones, and directing them to the channel that I know they're going to go to, which is most likely social media, versus, when I'm calling my dad, he's picking up. And so I have to be ready with that call and ready with that message and have that script ready to go, again, focused on them and their needs. But I mean, I'll still call everyone. I've never had issues with that. But yeah, I think that maybe answers it from my perspective.
Are you cold
I'd be curious to hear
dad?
next.
You're prospecting your dad, Nathan?
Hey man, he's still working at a bank. I'll sell him something.
Yeah, the only thing that I have noticed is that if I tend to get, it's a little biased because I'm mostly calling salespeople. So if I think about when I'm calling folks that are clients and I'm, doing some call sessions and stuff with them, I do notice that I might say dude more if the person seems kind of like my language is a little more casual, and I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing though. That might just be a bias that I have. I think being aware of any bias you have about how you communicate based on a person's generation or age is probably really important. I should probably pay a little closer attention to that, actually.
I think you can just let them set the tone. To answer Stephanie's question, I think it doesn't change my first tier of outreach and it doesn't change my opener. What it does change is like when I hear them respond, when I hear the other person, I sort of want a pattern match to them. It's like you wouldn't talk to your buddies from high school the same way you would talk to, I don't know, your girlfriend's grandmother, right? Those people, you're going to act differently. You're going to talk differently. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just you're respecting where the other person comes from. And so my recommendation is hear how they communicate and then respond in kind, right? If they're super bubbly and happy and they've got a lot of energy and they're really talkative, okay, you might want to match to them. If they're sort of gruff and short and stern and like right to the point, you might want to lean in that direction. So sort of feel where the other person is coming from, right? Mirroring is what Jess said. Yes, I want you to try to communicate the way that they communicate.
Yeah, and I'll change it on that. That's something I learned really young in my sales career, was to try to reflect the person you're speaking with. And I think that's still really relevant today, to where you can find a subtle balance of maintaining your own personality and maintaining who you are. But, if their mannerisms are slightly different than yours, it's okay to adjust that in the call and even in your emails and how you write. Probably don't end with a crazy subject line or crazy signature, right? Make it more professional, make it more clean, depending on your audience. So you can absolutely tailor those based off who you're reaching out to and how they reply.
Yeah. I think this is a really interesting one. And I know some folks are joking. Obviously, we're not going to match accents and stuff like that.
Yeah, don't do that.
Pretty offensive. Probably not.
I think one of the key things is you should be yourself, right? Like
Exactly.
you're not changing who you are. I'm just saying, okay, if the person's really quick to the point, maybe I need to get quick to the point. So
Exactly.
yeah, don't
But
do
this
anything
is-
offensive.
Yeah, and this is where even in the United States, the US, it feels like 3 or 4 countries in one sometimes. How we connect and talk to people on the East Coast, like particularly Boston and New York, it's going to be pretty fast paced, and people tend to not mess around, in my experience versus Midwest, South, that kind of stuff. Let's talk about the next part though. So Nick, we do our permission-based opener. They say, hey, yeah, cool. Go ahead, dude. What comes out next?
Cool. So thanks, right? What I want to do here, and part of the reason that I say thanks is I want to give my brain a second to sort of catch up because I'm nervous here, right? I just asked, can I tell you why I called? And my heart's pounding. I've got that feeling in my stomach. I want to give myself a second to thanks. And you know what? You could even start a timer if you'd like. Ha. That's what I say next. I say thanks, and you could even start a timer if you'd like. And then I do a fake rehearsed laugh. And the reason for that is one, I want to show them I'm serious about respecting their time. 2, I want to have a little bit of fun on this thing. 3, there is a big difference between somebody physically hearing what comes out of my mouth and actually listening intellectually to what I'm about to say. And the reason for that statement, thanks, and you could even start a timer if you'd like, is I want to have some buffer for them to be prepared to hear what's going to come out of my mouth next. And I might say something like, thanks, Jason, right? The reason that I'm calling you is what I don't want to do is dump on, here's what my product and service does. Here's how I help people like you. So what I do is I try to attack the problem that I know this person is dealing with. I think 98% of people should take their perfectly polished value proposition and take a look at it and give it one last kiss and then throw it in the trash can, because the value proposition isn't what you should be leading with. You should be leading with what I call a problem proposition. Attack the problem that you suspect this other person has. So thanks, Jason. You could even start a timer if you'd like. Haha. Jason, the reason I'm calling you is typically when I speak with CFOs of law firms with less than 100 employees, they tell me that they are frustrated with all of the deductions, rejections, and appeals that they get on their electronic bills that they send to insurance companies. I'm calling you about something that can make some of that go away, and I'm wondering if you might be open to learning more when I'm not cold calling you out of the blue. What I did here. 1, I led with a typically statement. I'm not putting this other person in a box. I'm not saying, hey, this is exactly what I know you're dealing with. People don't want to feel cornered. They don't want to feel like I'm saying every CFO that I ever talked to deals with this problem. Typically, some of the times, oftentimes, I occasionally see that when I speak with, insert persona you're calling here, CFOs of law firms with less than 50 employees, they tell me that. And then I use a word that signifies pain. They're frustrated, they're concerned, they're anxious, they're upset, that. And then I said a problem. I said the problem that my product or service solved. It was an e-billing solution for law firms that build insurance companies. And I made that problem extremely, extremely, extremely specific, almost too specific. They're frustrated with the deductions, rejections, and appeals. What I didn't say is they're frustrated that their bills are taking too long to get approved. Saving time and saving money. If either of those are your problem or value proposition, you're too general. Go a couple levels deeper. You're better off going too deep on the pain or the problem than not deep enough, because you can always come up. You can't always go down because you'll get rejected. And then the CTA there is like, would you be open to learning more when I'm not cold calling you out of the blue? I didn't say anything about how I solved that problem, because what I want to get from them is, do they have that problem? Do they have any interest in making that problem go away? They're not going to book the meeting right off of that statement, off that ask. They're not going to say, sure, here's my calendar. They are going to say, well, can you tell me more? Or how do you do that? Or, well, we don't have that problem, but it sounds sort of similar to this. And that's how you get the conversation going. I'll pause. I don't know if you want to break any of that down, Jason.
Yeah. So this whole topic, just to bring everything full circle, is how to warm up a cold call. Right. And so far, what I've heard, and I teach the same exact thing, is we haven't talked about our product or what it does at all. That's very intentional. Why do we leave that out? Because a fear that I hear is, well, we haven't told them what we do. They're not going to know. There's no context for this conversation. Why do we leave that out, Nick?
the prospect doesn't care about your product or solution. They don't care about the way that you solve something. They care about getting their job done and succeeding in their job and dealing with the problems that they deal with. And when I call somebody and say, I'm calling you because we've got an expense management platform that helps a lot of CFOs save time and money, right? The customer is not actively seeking an expense management platform when you cold call them. If they come inbound, whole different story, right? They have a list of expense management platforms. We're talking about a cold call here. The prospect is not seeking a category of software. They're not looking for expense management solutions. They're frustrated that they have a big pile of expense reports that they need to get through before the weekend hits. That's what I should be talking about, not the way that I solve it. Let's agree that there's a problem here, that there's an issue, and that there's an issue that you, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, want to solve. And then we can get into the conversation about how we get there. It's like you wouldn't go into the gym and look at the fittest, healthiest person in the gym and say, hey, I can sell you a training plan if you'd like. I'm not in very good shape. Why would I be selling that person a training plan? They should probably be selling it to me. So don't pitch somebody who doesn't actually have a problem, right? Once they have and you're calling them because you suspect you have that problem. But if someone's like, I'm really happy with where I am physically, okay, I'm not going to try to push and sell them an exercise plan.
Yeah. No, totally. I think one other important element, this peer signaling piece. So you specifically said, the reason I'm calling you is that when I speak to these types of people at these types of companies, you're speaking in customer voice.
Yes.
And I think that's super important. No matter what you do right there, hey, it could be I was talking to a few XYZs last week, or in my conversations with these types of people and these types of roles, these types of companies. You want to signal to that person. This is a way that you can add relevance to the conversation with very little work. What are your thoughts on this piece? What comes after we do our permission-based opener, adding relevance, kind of getting the conversation started? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think Nick nailed it. I think I've even seen people ask if you can repeat it. It's perfectly done because, again, it makes it relatable. It focuses on the problems that they have. And anytime we can add that human aspect, right? For me, it's like, hey, I want to spend an extra hour with my kids and I can't because I got to get these freaking expense reports done. And somebody calls me and says, hey, what if I could get that hour for you? Immediately I'm interested. I wasn't yesterday. I wasn't 5 minutes earlier, but I am now. And so finding those pain points and relating to them is so, so valuable. But one thing I want to point out is this isn't just for cold calling. This works exceedingly well for cross-selling and expansion as well. So those of you that have accounts that you're managing, reaching out to them and relating back to, hey, I'm working with a lot of people in your position. And I know that this is a pain point that is just rampant across the industry in your space. And I want to learn how we might be able to help you solve those problems. It is unbelievably successful to listen to those customers and relate back to those pain points. I don't want to make a tangent there, but I don't want that to be missed on this audience. If you do manage accounts, this is so hyper valuable for existing customers and not just cold calling. Listen for those pains and then relate to them and align that to how you can help them solve those pain points.
Well, actually, that's something you said there's really interesting, Nathan, where it's when you're cross-selling, because I remember when I had to do that. And I always found it so awkward to be I was calling someone who was already sort of a customer of ours, but they didn't know me. And it felt like a cold call, but they were already a customer. And so I remember feeling really uncomfortable making those calls. And whatever you just said there made me think I could literally just say, typically when I talk to people that are already customers of ours and using X product, they tell me that and then insert problem that your other product solves.
Yep.
And so I feel like that is a really natural way to connect. Hey, you're already a customer but here's another problem you might also have.
Yeah.
I wish I had that thought 5 years ago. I might have.
Yeah. So good stuff so far. I want to get to a question. Andrew Reagan, what's up, Andy? How do we get more talk out of the less talkative? I agree we want them to talk more than us, but most often they are not wanting to talk. So I struggle with pulling conversation out of the prospect. So I'll kick this question your way first, Nathan. So we've kind of done the thing that Nick suggested. It's very much in alignment with what I teach as well. We talk about people like them, ask if they're having a problem. what can we do to get people to open up a little bit more if they don't really seem super talkative at that point?
Yeah, honestly, it can be tough at many of those cold calls where it's just a stone cold nothing. And I'll usually try to relate it back to industry. That's where I'll focus on the news. I'll focus on my knowledge of the space, any relevant things that have happened across the industry that maybe they could be interested in talking about. Especially for me, I've spent a lot of time selling into product teams, sales operations, not your typical like energetic, bubbly people. So you do have to get into more of I'll call it weeds topics of I've learned about this new coding opportunity, or different things that just, again, I'm building a relationship. And I always try to look it back to when I'm standing in a grocery line, I can spark up a conversation with pretty much anybody just by talking about what's going on around, or I'll listen to what's happening and spark a conversation about that or nudge into it. So, I think it can be challenging, and there's definitely cold calls that just fall on their face. So let's be honest. But I think if you can relate it back to something in their space and get onto a topic that they're interested in, you can get them to start talking. From my experience.
Yeah, Nick.
Andy, can you put in the chat where in the call are you running into this the most? I'm curious. Andy's furiously typing right now because I feel like it's different. It's different depending upon where in the call they're not talkative. If they're not talkative after the opener, that's a whole different piece than if you sort of said your thing and you're in the conversation. I don't see anything from Andy. So, he said, after I get permission, generally, I'll talk about a pain point. Then they are quick to agree. Okay. So I think the thing here is two tools that I might encourage you to employ. One is just silence.
Silence.
Put yourself on mute, right? Don't say anything. They say, yep. So you say they're quick to agree, and then you have to extrapolate from there. Okay, if they say, yeah, don't say anything. Put yourself on mute. Let them fill the silence. It is going to feel extremely, extremely awkward. And one of two things is going to happen. They are either going to fill that silence and talk to you, which is what you wanted, or they are going to say, well, can you tell me more? Can you give me more information? Like, I'm not even really sure what this is. That's a good thing. That is them giving you permission to tell them more. What you shouldn't do is they say, yep, we have that problem, and then they don't say anything else. And then you jump in and extrapolate from there because you've not yet gotten permission from them to give more information. So what I want to do is either I literally put myself on mute to keep myself from talking and get them to fill the silence. Or if they say, well, can you tell me more? Can you give me more information? Then you have permission to do that. You can also do things where you hand the mic to the other person, where you say stuff like, they say, yeah, we are dealing with that. And then they say nothing else. You can literally say stuff like, could you tell me more about that? Mm-hmm. Or I guess I'm curious, everybody sort of has a little bit of a different experience dealing with that. Would you mind telling me sort of what things look like for you? And then you might also say something like, I don't want to sit here and pretend that I know instantly we can solve your problem. I guess, would you be open to sharing a little bit more? And then I can tell you if I feel like this isn't going to be something that could help with that. I always want to hand them the mic. I want to give the other person permission to share more about their thing. And I'm always sort of pushing away, right? You heard on that statement, I wasn't saying, could you tell me more? And then I can tell you if we can solve your problem. I'm saying, I'll tell you if we can't solve your problem. I always want to be the person who's really critically thinking about like, hey, if you say something that means this isn't a fit, I'm going to tell you. I'm still trying to sell the deal, right? But I do that to encourage the other person to share more info.
So much gold right there. The silence thing. I was just talking to my wife, Sarah, is also in sales. She's a little bit newer in her sales career in the first 6 months or so. And we were talking about that in a sales call, that silence and just allowing the other person to keep talking. That's so powerful. I also dropped something in the chat. I love the TED framework. I didn't come up with that. It's, tell, explain, describe. So tell me more. You can use it as a little kind of nod, The other thing too that I would recommend, I call this question stacking. So if you think and backtrack a bit, you have to really have a good understanding of your personas in order to do this. So if you know the common problems you solve for, take it one step backwards and talk to how they might be trying to solve that problem right now, and then ask a question about it. So I'll give you an example. So there's a client of mine that sells a customer experience solution. So the way that this sort of works is the people that they reach out to really care about reducing cost to serve. So essentially what they want to do is, like, if they're running a contact center, they don't want a bunch of people calling into that contact center. I know it's kind of counterintuitive, but the way that they're trying to solve that problem right now, people calling in, driving up the cost to serve, is they'll put PDF documents and digital assets online for people to answer their own questions in an FAQ. So if I ask someone, hey, reducing cost to serve, is that a challenge? And they say yes, and they don't say anything, I can say, well, hey, I'm really curious. A lot of times what we hear is that, contact centers are putting digital assets up online, FAQs, and what they find is that customers end up looking at those things. They can't get their questions asked, and they end up calling into the contact center anyways. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you prevent that? Or what's your experience been with that? Being able to talk to how they might be trying to solve that problem, like that demonstrates that acumen. That's that peer signaling that we talked about. So I'll leave you guys with that little nugget. We got a minute and a half left here. Let's just rapid fire real quick. Voicemails. Nathan, you first. Voicemail. What's like one tip that you have for leaving a good voicemail?
Oh man, I think for me, I typically will never tell them the company I'm calling from, which may sound crazy, but I don't. And I always point them to something that I've sent them. I make sure they hear my name, and I sometimes will leave a callback number. Usually it's already on their phone. So most likely I'm pointing them towards something I sent them, letting them know who I am. And that's pretty much where I leave it. I don't do a lot of selling via voicemail.
Nick?
98% of salespeople start their voicemails with, Jason, this is Nick Sigelski with ABC. Don't lead with that because you sound like everybody else. Instead, context only in your voicemail. Jason, I'm calling because I just finished reading the article about your team's expansion into Europe. I'm literally about to send you an email with the subject line X. By the way, this is Nick Sigelski with 30 Minutes to President's Club. That's it. I'm naming the trigger. I'm pointing at an email. I'm saying, here's the subject line of the email. By the way, this is who I am.
Yeah, love
Perfect.
it. I don't have anything to add. I'm going to drop a couple things in here. Go connect with Nick on LinkedIn. Give Nathan some love there. And I want to thank our sponsor here, Aller, for sponsoring this webinar and all that kind of good stuff. And I want to thank everyone here for participating, and Nick, you and Nathan as well. Appreciate your time today, you guys. This was really awesome. So go check out Aller. If there's some help that you guys want in finding some of these triggers and making it a little bit easier, that's a place to go. And make sure to follow these two for more content. Thanks, guys. That's all I got for you today.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Jason. Thank
Cool.
you, Jason, for putting this on. You are something special, my friend. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys too. Later, everyone. Have a good rest of your week. We'll see you.